The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com.
So tonight I'd like to talk about concentration and mindfulness. In sum, concentration is the power of focus, your capacity to focus. And mindfulness is the power of awareness. And they work hand in hand. They're two complementary energies, described often as the two wings of the practice. And creativity arises out of mindfulness, and yet it clearly draws on concentration as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about creativity as an aspect of this practice. And one of the areas I'm going to just to mention briefly is Kickstarter. Are you familiar with Kickstarter.com? So, people propose sometimes very creative ideas, and there's crowdsourcing to help them get going. So, one of my favorite Kickstarter campaigns. This is truly seeing the possible where it did not exist before. Someone created a panini press that would toast the face of Jesus on your bread. This person raised $25,000 to create this panini press. And the name of it was Grilled Jesus. So I hope that has tantalized you to listen to the rest of the talk. So this is somewhat of a classical talk, kind of describing these two wings of practice. And I'm going to talk about how concentration is power, and when you can concentrate, you can tap into sometimes extraordinary power. And I'll talk a little bit about the techniques that help you to develop concentration. There's quite a span. And how mindfulness is about awareness, but more than that, it's about liberation. It's about developing your capacity to see clearly. And we'll talk about how to develop more mindfulness, more clear seeing, and some of the techniques. So we're going to explore a couple different techniques through the evening. So, concentration as fuel and power. I grew up on a farm, and I worked on a farm all through college and grad school out in the Midwest, big 1,000-acre farm. And one of the great things about working on a farm is you have these really great toys you get to play with, big tractors and all kinds of things. And one of them was having an oxyacetylene torch, if you've ever used one. Really fun toy. And basically what it is a very, very hot flame. You have two different tanks, and you light them, and you can cut through steel like butter. You just cut right through it. Sometimes in our lives, our concentration can be like that, where you are supremely focused. And you know that feeling when you have to get something done, and somehow there's an intensity that emerges, you push everything to the side, and it's all you have right in front of you. If we're not trained in concentration, or if we're unsure about what to do, then we're beset by procrastination and distraction, and we're susceptible to being called off guard, off focus. And I've noticed how a lot of people use procrastination as a tool to cultivate that intensity and concentration. A lot of people wait till the very last second because there's a certain drama about the last second that actually gives them the focus to do what they need to do. It's very interesting how there's how procrastination has a healthy quality to it, because you're sort of contemplating what you're going to do. On the other hand, there's sort of like an avoidance to it. But what we're really after is that intensity of focus. So oftentimes what we do is we habitually wait until we have to act, and then we'll have some drama to get us to focus. But you can actually train yourself in concentration. It's really just an attentional training. If you're trying to do too many things at the same time, it's very, very clear that you're not very effective. The idea of multitasking, it doesn't really work for the vast majority of people. Studies have shown that the most effective thing to do is to do one thing at a time, and yet it's really challenging for us, particularly in this day and age where there's so much calling for our attention. We're so distractible, and we're so caught up in immediate gratification. So your capacity to concentrate is commensurate to your capacity to actually get things done. And there are lots of techniques, lots of skillful means, and I'm always looking for what are the best techniques to help me stay concentrated, because I tend to be pretty distractible myself. You may know of the Pomodoro technique, if you're not familiar with that. It's where you set a timer for 25 minutes and you focus on one thing. When the timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break, you set the timer for 25 minutes and you focus. And the whole idea is at the end of 25 minutes, you might be involved in something, but you force yourself to take a break. And that's been a helpful tool for me at times. Set a time period where you focus. And the reason why it's called the Pomodoro technique, it was an Italian guy in medical school, and his kitchen timer was shaped like a tomato. So, little backstory to the Pomodoro technique. The other thing I'll oftentimes do that I have found to be helpful, just another technique for cultivating concentration, because my to-do list is huge. It's endless. Where I'll pause in the beginning of a day, and I'll just decide what 3 things, if I get 3 things done, I'm going to call it a good day. What are those 3 things? And then just focus on those 3 things. And most importantly, you do the most difficult one first. And just psychologically, what I find when I can do that, I get the most gnarly thing done first. It just feels so good. And oftentimes there's a momentum to it that can be really, really helpful. The other thing that many people find helpful, and I do too, is to really be aware of managing my energy, to force myself to take breaks, to stand up, to walk around, to keep the energy flowing in my body so I don't fall into that low energy where I'm susceptible to distractions. So it's a very challenging time in this culture because there's so much information flowing around all the time. There's sort of this fever pitch of shouting through advertising and so forth. My uncle, this was years ago, came back from the grocery store and was unpacking the groceries, and he saw this item that he had never seen before and had no use for, and could not figure out why he bought it. And then he realized that it had been in a radio ad that he'd been hearing all day long. We don't realize how much of our attention is being distracted by all the different voices. In fact, the average American is exposed to 5,000 ads a day. 5,000 little branding, hey, look at me things all day. So it's no wonder that we are a distracted culture. And in order to counteract that distraction, we have to train ourselves to be one-pointed. And we're really swimming against the stream. The Buddha described these practices as swimming upstream, swimming against your own conditioning, avoiding pain, seeking pleasure. But more than that, he said, and even 2,500 years ago, he said, you're swimming against the culture. The entire culture is going that way when we're looking for something that's actually that way. So this is where meditation training comes in. And there's a quality to the concentration practices which it's work. There's a willful quality to concentration practice. And I remember being about in week 3 of a month-long retreat, and it just sort of hit me, and I realized, oh, I'm training my brain. This is what this is. I'm training my brain to pay attention on purpose. While concentration practices do have a willful quality, and there's a quality to work to it because you're beginning again and again, calling yourself back again and again and again. At the same time, and this is a very curious thing, that concentration actually leads to bliss. The concentration techniques, on the first level, they're calming. They calm the mind. The roiling, boiling mind. Over time, when you have that puppy sit again and again and again, it starts to sit for longer and longer periods of time. And in that same way, your mind will begin to calm. It'll begin to come back more often as you practice. So there's a quality of calming that's really quite wonderful. In the calming, you're less reactive. It feeds right into mindfulness, into clear seeing. So instead of being reactive, you actually have the capacity to be more responsive to what's happening, which is huge. But there's also a very beautiful quality of concentration that is an immediate doorway into happiness and into bliss. If you think of the times when you were at your most intensive happy times in your life, those moments, being in nature, being with a loved one, intimacy, playing with a dog, playing sports, involved in a task, whatever it may be, chances are very, very good that you were intensely concentrated. And you get access to what we call the flow state. And in those moments, you're not anticipating what's next. You're not thinking about what happened. You're like in this unfolding moment. The moment is just opening up right in front of you. And often what we do is we seek those states because they're so pleasurable. And we can seek them through all the great chemicals out there, or we can seek them through video games, which are very absorbing, or rock climbing, or sports, or whatever it may be. But we're seeking that quality of happiness, that quality of absorption. And you can seek it externally, but you can also cultivate it internally. You can cultivate that quality of absorption that is not dependent on externals. And that's the power of meditation. So there are lots of different techniques for cultivating concentration. Doing the breathing can be a very powerful technique, I find. I find it very helpful in the beginning of a meditation, or if I'm just getting a little bit too ramped up, slow down the breath. Count slowly to 5 on the inhale, 5 on the exhale. And after just a few rounds of breath, there's a quality of calm that can occur. Many people I know, when they hear I teach meditation, they say, it's funny, I love yoga, but I hate meditation. And I understand that, because when you're in a yoga posture hanging out for your dear life, you're in the moment, when you're trying to watch the subtlety of the in-breath and the out-breath, it's so subtle, the mind can wander. It's like when you're in a yoga posture and you're hanging on, it's like you're throwing a stick for the puppy. The puppy's got a job. That's right. Don't fall over, don't fall over, don't fall over. So it can be very helpful to explore some other techniques that give you an anchor that is a little bit more, a little grosser anchor than just the subtlety of the breath. And the technique which I've shared here before, but which I find so helpful, is using a slow motion practice with the hands. And you can do this in many, many different ways. Oftentimes when I lead it, we'll have the arms up overhead and an ultra slow motion release of the hands. You imagine that if someone was watching you, they could barely perceive motion. And what this does is it creates a quality of absorption. The anchor is the feeling in the hands as your arms move through space. And you can use the hands just in front of your chest and slowly down. Why don't we try this just to see what that's like? And to make it a little more engaging, let's just begin shaking out the hands. Imagine that you've got, your hands are wet and you're flinging water off the fingertips. And then imagine your hands are like moths and let them just kind of flap around. If you feel self-conscious, close your eyes, no one can see you. And then stretch your arms out in front of you, and with your left palm up and your right palm down, and then squeeze the hands in the fists and then lengthen the fingers. Then reverse the hands. And then shake them out again. And then let the palms come right at shoulder level, so your palms are facing you. And let your eyes close, and let your awareness just flow into the hands. And now relax your palms, relax the fingers, and now relax your thumbs. And just sense or feel any quality of pulse, or tingling, or vibration, or subtle energy. In a few moments, you're going to begin an ultra slow motion release of the hands. Imagine that if someone was watching you, they could barely perceive movement. And as you're ready, let your hands begin a slow motion descent down toward your lap. The anchor is the sensation in the palms and the micro movements of the hands as they flow through space. And just sense the smallest unit of movement in your awareness. The molecules of air slipping between the fingers. And we'll take 2 more minutes. How intimately can you feel? And wherever you may find your hands, whether they've come to rest or whether they're in transit, just take a moment to relax and just feel the cumulative effect of these minutes of concentration and absorption. What do you feel? What has shifted? You may feel more of a quality of being here. Perhaps not so much of analyzing your experience, but just being present to it. Perhaps a little more calmer, less distracted. So if you like, you can open your eyes. If not, feel free to remain with them closed. That practice may have been challenging or maybe irritating for you, depending on your mind state. But you may have found it to be a quality of absorption, like a drawing inward of awareness. And that's what concentration can do, as a quality of calming, a quality of absorption, less analytical, more just sort of here. This is a gathering of attention. That's what concentration does. It gathers your attention in the here and now. And it's very, very helpful, I find in my own practice, that at different times, depending on my mind state or my emotional state, different techniques are going to bring me to that sense of here and now. If I'm really scattered, just the subtlety of breath isn't going to work. Maybe it's really helpful that I do something really physical beforehand, some exercise or yoga or something like that will help me to arrive. Sometimes a few minutes of this slow motion movement helps me to get absorbed, or the slow breath. It's very important to remember there's no one technique. It's whatever the technique is that's going to bring you back. That's a valid technique. There's so much more to talk about of concentration and the different levels of absorption that you can achieve. There's a huge topic here of the levels of what are called the jhanas, the deeper levels of absorption, taking you into sort of the upwelling of joy and taking you all the way to consciousness of space and consciousness of lack of space, and it gets way, way out there. And yet, it's just one half of the equation. As I like to say, there are some very, very concentrated people on the planet who are miserable. Concentration does not equal happiness. And that's where the other side of the equation comes in, which is awareness, non-judging awareness. That's your capacity to be aware of what is happening. Concentration helps you to arrive. Mindfulness helps you to see what's actually there. You can think of concentration as the lens of the camera, and you can focus that lens in. And awareness is like it's the chip or the film that's taking it all in. And there are techniques that can help to cultivate that as well. So mindfulness are the techniques that lead to liberation. They're the techniques that help you see where you're caught, where you're stuck, where you're holding back from being fully alive. So I consider myself kind of a cultural creative. I love, new things and inventions and creativity and all that stuff. And my friends who know me well are always joking about the latest thing that I found. One friend said, he was saying, he said, every time I see you with something new, he said, look, it's a pen, but it also turns into an umbrella. And it'll charge your phone at the same time. So Kickstarter is, I mentioned Kickstarter at the beginning of the talk, and it's always fun to see the creative stuff that's out there. And there's some, because I do a lot of photography and video, there's always new creative stuff, you know, a waterproof tripod and all that kind of stuff. And someone came up with an ice chest that also includes a blender, a Bluetooth speaker, a USB charger, a bottle opener, and storage bin for plates. $8 million in donations. This other thing I saw, it's called iFetch, which is an automatic tennis ball tosser for your dog. What a brilliant idea. And here's the best. No, this is the second to best. Someone created a miniature shotgun that shoots salt to kill flies in your house. And then this one takes it over the top. This is called the CH4. It measures how much gas you pass per day, so you can correlate it to the foods you eat. That's mindfulness. It's like, where do those ideas come from? You know, it's getting completely out of the box. That's mindfulness. Maybe you've noticed just through your meditation practice that your perspective on your life has shifted a little bit. A little bit less reactive, a little bit less anxious. It's not uncommon that people who practice, they begin to see the repeating patterns in their life. And just in seeing those patterns, there's a sense of something possible by looking a little closer. Oftentimes people remark how their relationships start to shift, that the people they used to hang with are just not quite the right vibrational match anymore. There's something else they're wanting and their friends aren't changing with them. Or the story they always told themselves of what would make them happy, it's not doing it anymore. Or certain habitual things just don't really create the joy that they had before. Mindfulness is awareness. And the less you are caught in your patterns, the more free you are. As Einstein said, no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness that created it. So if you shift your consciousness, you're completely and radically changing your relationship to all the old patterns of how you've lived your life. Some obviously useful, some perhaps not quite so useful anymore. So there's a direct relationship between mindfulness and intuition, and mindfulness and insight. Oftentimes this is called insight meditation. We begin with concentration, we arrive. You use concentration to sort of drill down to the here and now. The mind goes away, you bring it back, you bring it back, you bring it back. And then mindfulness comes in, and you become more self-aware. Oh, there's that thought again. Well, what's that all about? Oh, here's this anxiety that just keeps coming back again and again and again. What's this all about? Is that true, that that's really going to happen? Is it true that I really think that's actually real? That's all part of the byproduct, where you begin to unwind your story, you begin to unwind your narrative, and inevitably, as Deepak Chopra says, the field of infinite possibility becomes a little bit more accessible. It's kind of a magical process. I think of it as an airplane. You know, you're on the runway, and you know what it's like. As soon as the plane lifts off, you're at 500 feet. Everything looks kind of cool from 500 feet, and then it's 1,000 feet. Then you're just below the clouds, and then you're above the clouds. That's pretty much what meditation is like, or what it can be like, particularly if you can sustain your practice. You begin to lift out of all of your habitual thinking. You become more self-aware to all the limiting stories, all the limiting emotions. You begin to sense that every thought you think isn't actually personal. They're just thoughts passing through. So concentration is something you can dial in. As a photographer, I'm always thinking about what aperture I'm shooting through the lens. If you close down the aperture, you get a lot more depth of field. If you open it up, you get you bring in more light. So there are times in your practice you can really dial in that concentration. Just hold, if you're doing the slow motion release of the hands, just to feel the pulse and the pads of the fingers, you'll get very, very absorbed, very concentrated. That quality of deep relaxation with awareness. And you can also use concentration as just kind of a wide open space, just to feel or imagine the space around you. So how do we develop awareness? How do we become aware? I've noticed in my life that the people I find the most interesting are usually the people who've suffered the most. People who've gone through a loss, have gone through some health crisis, or have lost someone they've loved, or have been betrayed and have healed through their betrayal. Those who've healed through their loss come away with two things. They come away with a greater sense of compassion and a greater sense of wisdom. When you practice meditation with any degree of sincerity, inevitably you come in contact with reality. Particularly this technique, because it's an embodied technique. You're coming in contact with reality. So you see and experience clearly what is here. And then you ask yourself, can I let this be? How does this moment want me to be with it? And the more you can stay with this practice, which is not easy, the more you will see more clearly. And the more you will find the capacity and, paradoxically, the confidence that you can be with anything. The flower of the practice is considered equanimity. And one way to think of equanimity is a quality of steadiness. That the states we're looking for of happiness and absorption and bliss, they are available externally, but they're conditional. What the more you begin to find is that you can actually access happiness without any conditions whatsoever. And that's really exciting stuff. I'm aware as our time has flown, and I do believe we do have some conditional happiness waiting for you in the form of cookies.